Hi there, thanks for coming. So this is Fuzzee Road to Health, and I'm Fuzzee D. We're going to talk today a little bit about what you're going to find on this channel. We're going to talk about how I've gone from being bedridden, weighing 540 pounds, to pretty much completely ambulatory and getting better all the time, and I'm down to 372 pounds. And I recently started a new diet, but we're not going to really get into that here in detail. We'll talk about it right after this. Let's get started. Welcome back. So I'm going to post a couple pictures up here, kind of a before and after. And actually, I'd make that 3 pictures. So I'm going to also show you a picture of kind of how good a shape I was back in many years ago, and this is the goal I'm shooting for. I've got a long history of medical issues. I'm not going to get into details here. We'll do that in another video. This is just kind of an introduction. We'll start with the fact that in 2012 I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder called Myasthenia Gravis. Causes severe muscle weakness. And while they were searching for that diagnosis, I was diagnosed with several other autoimmune diseases. By the time I was diagnosed and in the hospital, I weighed 540 pounds. I was bedridden, and I remained bedridden for over 10 years. When I got to the hospital after diagnosis, I could barely breathe. I couldn't swallow solid food, liquids only. I couldn't speak. I mean, I could kind of make sound, but nobody could understand what I was trying to say except my wife. I could stand up to transfer from bed to wheelchair, but it usually required assistance. So I was in pretty bad shape. I've also got several injuries with my back. Because of the myasthenia gravis, I had a bad fall and crushed a vertebrae in the middle of my back. Hospital for quite a while after that. And then I've got several missing or ruptured discs, and that's just from a lifetime of trying to do hard work and fighting being overweight most of my life, except for a few year period where I was in good shape back in the 90s. So it's been quite the journey. Now, by the time I reached about late 2018, early 2019, somewhere in there, I kind of had enough. I knew a change had to happen. I couldn't keep living like that. You couldn't even call it living. So I started researching alternative health. See, this disease I had originally been diagnosed with as a child when I was 12 or 13. And back then, my mom took me down to the Lower Mainland. I live in Canada. We went to see a naturopath. We lived down there for a couple months. They ran all kinds of tests, put me on an elimination diet, put me on all these vitamins. I mean, I was taking fistfuls of vitamins every day. Bottom line is, about 6 months later, when we went to the specialist in Alberta, the neurologist, all signs of the disease were gone. And that many years ago, they didn't even think remission was possible. So their conclusion was that both the other doctors were wrong. My GP who originally diagnosed it and the naturopath that proved me, they all had to be wrong. So they had misdiagnosed me. That was their claim. That full remission lasted almost 30 years. So in 2018, 2019, when I'm laying in bed for 12, 13 hours a day, I knew that there had to be another answer, so I started researching. I won't get into all the details there. I've got other resources you can look at that I'll link down below, where you can deep dive a little more into stuff that I was doing. But I started using all kinds of alternative therapies that I researched. The first thing was to try and start dealing with the pain a little better. I was on huge doses of morphine because of my back. I was on such high doses of morphine that if a person who had never taken morphine took even one of my daily doses, it would have killed them within minutes, or 30, 40 minutes kind of a thing. These were ridiculously high doses, and I was completely non-functional. My mental acuity, I think my IQ is probably equivalent to 75 or 80 during this time, and I had no short-term memory. If I watched a TV show, I could watch it the next day with fresh eyes, feeling like I had never seen it. So it was no kind of life. So the first thing I knew I needed to do was to get off the morphine, and that's about all my brain could deal with at that point. So that was the first plan. So I started tapering down off the morphine, and as the pain started ramping in, I started learning meditation techniques and kind of like self-hypnosis. I mean, it's not hypnosis. They call it self-hypnosis. It's just an intense form of meditation, basically. And then I started learning some other techniques to deal with the spikes in pain. So one of the first things I was able to do as well was get off of it was another type of morphine, but it was a fast acting for breakthrough pain. So I was able to get rid of those entirely and start tapering down my main dosage. And when I got down about a third less than what I had been taking, though cannabis was not legal at that time, so I went to a doctor and got a prescription to use it for pain. And so I started using the cannabis a little more and kept tapering down on the morphine. It also helped me get over the withdrawal effects. So it took me about 9 or 10 months to completely taper off. The last 3.5 months, my family doctor set me up with a prescription plan to finish the taper down in a controlled manner that was going to be safe. So I got off all the morphine, and then I started tapering back on the cannabis. And at this point, I was eating a very narrow range of food. A lot of it was, smoothies and with, like a carnation meal replacement kind of a stuff. A lot of times that's all like stomach. We got a little fancier with the smoothies after a while, but there wasn't very much inflammatory food going on. So my overall pain levels, once I came off all this stuff and the weight was coming down, so things were starting to feel a bit better, and I was able to start walking around the apartment a little bit. And as I got more and more ambulatory and started feeling better, I started cutting back on the cannabis. And by the end of October, I was off the morphine, and by Christmas Eve 2019, I was off of the cannabis as well. My weight was actually going down pretty good. I had gotten down to 340 pounds, and madness hit, and we couldn't go outside, and I got depressed and went off. I was able to eat more because I didn't have nausea all the time. And so I was able to start eating what, most people are eating, and my weight started ballooning. So by the time the end of 2021 came around, I was back up to 480 pounds. Then I needed to go to a big event, and there was going to be lots of cameras and stuff there. And I went, okay, I've got to do something different and start trying to lose a little weight here again. This is insane. And of course, my health was rapidly deteriorating. My pain had ramped back up. I had to go back on cannabis. I really wasn't that happy, but I found a diet. Actually, my wife and we had found a diet through where we buy our vitamins. So it's called the R3 plan. And basically what it is it's like a keto, a pretty strict keto. And you go on this R3 reset that resets your metabolism for a 2-week period. You're not allowed almost anything except for just some very specific food items. Not carnivore, but just some very specific food items. And it worked. We started losing weight again, and by the time I got to the event, I had lost a nice little chunk of weight. Not a lot, but I was down about 15 pounds or so. Weight loss kept getting a little better as I got a little stricter with my diet. By the time this last Christmas rolled around, Christmas 2022, I was down to about 390. So my weight loss kind of stalled. So I was kind of holding, not gaining, but not losing. So I was doing a little more research on what I could do to increase my diet, and I stumbled across these doctors, and as well as some podcasts from people who were on this new diet. So this, you've probably guessed by now, if you've found this channel, that this diet was carnivore. So my plan was to actually go on what's called ketovore, which is kind of like carnivore, but you're just allowed a few extra items. So the plan was to go on that for 30 days and then on to full carnivore. But after about 4 or 5 days, I was feeling so good, I just went full carnivore. So as of January 16th was when I started these new diets, and immediately the weight loss started again. So far, well, up until a couple days ago, I was averaging a weight loss of about 1.8 pounds per day. Now that all the kind of the water weight and stuff is gone, I'm losing about 1.2 pounds per day on average, or at least the last couple of days. I expect I'm going to have, you know, the odd pause of weight loss on a couple of days, that kind of a thing, as my system continues to adjust to the diet. The most important things, though, other than the weight loss, and don't get me wrong, that is extremely important, but I also suffer from lots of other autoimmune disorders and issues. So I have arthritis. So it's not a severe kind of arthritis, but you know, I feel pain in my joints and my hands and my shoulders and elbows and hips and ankles. And I've also got peripheral neuropathy, so I get like a really bad burning sensation on my feet all the time, and that's the only thing I can feel. Other than the burning, they're numb. Can't really feel much with them, and that's all because of this disease. Well, it's actually, there's other factors we're finding out now too, but essentially that's what it boils down to. It's all kind of tied in together. Within, I'd say 5 or 6 days, my chronic pain levels, other than my back, because that's mechanical pain, any pain that's kind of caused by disease, you know, kind of a thing. So those pain levels were down about 60% after a few days, and they dropped a little more. I ate a couple things, some spices that I found out later I shouldn't be eating. I had a little bit of a pain flare, but now, as of yesterday, I have no joint pain whatsoever. It's completely gone. For me, that's huge. But even bigger than that is the fact that we'd had a couple of power outages here. One, something blew and they patched it together temporarily, and then we had a planned power outage a couple weeks later to deal with it. Now in our building, I normally always take the elevator. Taking the stairs is extraordinarily difficult because of my muscle weakness. So the first power outage, I hadn't been on the diet yet, and I had to hold on to the rail with both hands, and it took all the strength I had with my hands and my legs to get me up one step at a time very slowly. It took me about 5 or 6 minutes to climb 2 flights of stairs. And by the time I got back in the apartment, I could barely move for hours. It was terrible. And then we had another power outage, and this was about the planned one, and this was about a week and a half ago or so. I still held on to the rail just to keep my balance. I didn't need any help from my arms, and I was able to go up those stairs like a normal person in speed. When I got to the top, my muscles were not quivering and completely worn out. I was out of breath because I'm terribly out of shape. Well, you know, let's be real. You know, because of my injuries, it's very difficult to exercise much. Now that, you know, that's going to be a lot easier now with the joint pain all gone. And I have been starting to do a little bit of exercise with some resistance bands, a little bit of walking around, that kind of thing. You know, the next important thing about going up the stairs a second time is once I got back in the apartment, I was a little bit winded for a few minutes. Once that was passed, I was able to mosey around and do stuff as normal. So it has significantly impacted my myasthenia gravis for the better as well. I've noticed that, you know, I've still got a little bit of residual skin issues here, but if you've watched any of my videos from my tutorial channel, you've seen sometimes my face has been in really, really bad shape. And I also have a spot on my arm here. You can barely see it now on camera, but this used to be really large and really red and flaky and itchy all the time. So I've got eczema and I've also got psoriasis. As this diet goes on, my skin is starting to clear. What it comes down to is the diet that we've been taught from birth, basically, that came out in the 50s, you know, that dietary plan that we inherited from the States, that pyramid. I won't get into all the research and all the documents that have been made public now about the bribes and stuff behind it. That's for another day. But suffice it to say that we have been lied to all of our lives about what foods are healthy and what aren't. And it turns out that all these grains and hydrogenated oils and sugars and even vegetables, they all cause their own issues. The legumes, for instance, have a lot of lectin, and that blocks our ability to feel full until your system is just screaming that you're full. You can't hear it until then. Many of the other foods, they cause an inflammatory response in the body, which also blocks our ability to lose weight. It blocks our ability for our cells to heal properly when they begin to mutate. And constant stress just drives our immune system around the bend. And this is why since the 1950s, there has been an incredibly sharp rise in chronic disease and obesity. And there's a good reason for that. And we're going to get into that in other videos. Now, if you look at my channel, you see this is going to be the first video, but you'll see I've got some other resources in there. I've got a section of keto and carnivore doctors that you can take a look at and check out their videos and stuff. There's everybody from family doctors to neurosurgeons that are talking about this, have done research, and most of them have been on it themselves for many, many years, some longer than 20 years. And I've got a playlist on there called Relevant Carnivore and Keto, and you can go in there, and there's quite a few kind of key videos from these different doctors that you can take a look at. So I'm not, I'm not trying to convince anyone to go on this diet. And let me just say right up front, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a medical practitioner of any kind. Please keep that in mind. I'm just a guy who has fought with medical issues all of my life. I was born with medical issues. I was on antibiotics for years and years and years. And, by the time I was 6 years old, I'd had so many chronic ear infections, I had lost 85% of my hearing. Most of which I got back thanks to alternative therapies, by the way. We actually used vitamin E oil drops in each ear a couple times a day. Took about 9-10 months, but I got most of my hearing back. I just had medical issues after medical issues basically my whole life. When I was about 10 or 11, I started developing migraines. And I started developing problems with my joints in my knees. I was diagnosed with something back then called chondromalacia patelli. Basically, the underside of my kneecap was malformed or roughened, whatever, and it would generate fluid in my knees, cause all kinds of problems. I was actually in a wheelchair a couple times for a short period of time as a kid. And then, of course, there was that myasthenia diagnosis. And, after that elimination diet and all those vitamins, most of the medical stuff went away for a long time, for the most part. I still had the skin issues, and I still had issues with heat. If I got too hot, I would sometimes pass out. Other times I would black out and wander around. When I was 12 years old, I went down to the States to an acting seminar down in Utah. It was really, really hot that summer. It was like just a summer program for a couple of weeks. And I actually, a couple of times, blacked out and came to on the ground like miles from where I had last remembered anything. And so I went to a doctor down there, and they couldn't figure anything out. They didn't understand what was causing it. And it was shortly after that I was diagnosed with the myasthenia at that point. So what we're going to do here on this channel going forward is we're going to be covering more information as it comes out. We're going to be doing some vlogs with me as I start doing more exercise and walking and stuff, and we're going to really kind of chart my progress with this carnivore diet and the body changes that happen. It's kind of where we're going at this point. So stay tuned, check back often. I'm going to try to do updates fairly often. I don't like to commit to a schedule because one thing that will trigger my disease is stress. And if I stress over something like this, I could actually trigger myself. So I have to be a little bit casual about how I do things, at least at this point. But stay tuned and feel free to ask questions. Use the resources below, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks for hanging out. Bye for now.